Hi, everybody. It's really nice to see so many people here. This is our Giramondo's second event on this Crowdcast platform, I believe, and it's really nice to be able to share it with so many of you who've joined us. My name's Nick Tapper. I'm the Associate Publisher at Giramondo Publishing based in Sydney. I'm speaking from unceded Gadigal land, land of the Eora Nation. And from here, I pay respects to elders past and present. I'm really pleased to be joined by two wonderful Giramondo authors this evening, one of whom, Vanessa Berry, is in Sydney, though outside of my 5K radius, and Keri Glastonbury is up in Newcastle. I won't spend too long introducing Vanessa because, first of all, because Keri will do a little bit of that, and also because all of you who are here, I'm sure, will know Vanessa very well, but we're here to celebrate her new book, Gentle and Fierce, a wonderful essay collection about animals and about the ways in which humans and animals share the world, both in the form of relationships we have with real animals and also the ways in which we imagine them and see them through popular culture, through objects, through long-standing relationships with our imagination of animals as well. It's really nice to be having a launch for this event. We've been talking for a long time about having a launch in person, and it's unfortunate that we're in the situation that we are, but we still hold out hope that for friends in Sydney and perhaps in Melbourne, we will be able to do something in person in the future as well. For those of you who haven't been on a Crowdcast event before, you've probably seen that there's a comment box running down the right-hand side of your screen there. And you will also see a button that allows you to ask a question. Keri will be talking to Vanessa for most of the session, and through the course of the session, you can put questions into that box, and I think that Keri will come to those at the end of the session. Besides that, I think it should be pretty straightforward. Keri, I'd just like to say, is a wonderful author, a poet. She has a long-standing relationship with Vanessa, and they have a friendship that no doubt will come up in the course of the session. Keri is an associate professor at Newcastle University in creative writing, and I highly recommend as well her book, Newcastle Sonnets, which Giramondo published in 2018. So without any more to say, I will leave the two of you to talk. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Nick. Well, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm speaking on the traditional and unceded land of the Awabakal people here in Mullumbimba, Newcastle, and pay respects to elders past, present, as well as any First Nations people in the audience tonight. So I first met Vanessa, fittingly it seems, around, I like to say, the turn of the century. And that was at UTS in 2003, where she was an undergraduate writing and cultural studies student, and I was doing a PhD in poetry. We became friends, and I always really loved going to parties at her house, and remember at one in Petersham in about 2009, there was a giant paper mache bear in the living room made by Vanessa's partner for a forest-themed birthday party. So also when I'd visit Vanessa, I'd always seek out Crolly the rabbit because I'd read about Crolly in her zines. I think Laughter and the Sound of Teacups, if he was around then, and definitely I Am a Camera. And in a way, visiting Vanessa was like seeing a storybook come to life. So here she is in the flesh again. Vanessa Berry, welcome.
Thanks, Keri. It's really lovely to be here, and well, thank you to everybody who's joined us tonight. Many significant and special people to me are here, so it means a lot that you're all here to celebrate Gentle and Fierce and listen to Keri and I have a chat. I am here speaking to you from Gadigal land, and yeah, really looking forward to talking Gentle and Fierce with you, Keri.
Yeah, so just as I was familiar with Crolly, many of you might be familiar with the animal menagerie stars of Gentle and Fierce, perhaps from the great Instagram series she did recently promoting the book. So I remember a ceramic otter, a book called Cat Catalogue, the ultimate cat book. And there was a quote from the cover that said, "More than you ever imagined a cat book could be," as well as Vanessa's childhood teddy bear, Dumb Bear. So for me, as a reader of Gentle and Fierce, it has the feel of an imaginative animal almanac or a book of days, where inanimate things might just become animate. And I read a great Rebecca Solnit quote recently, which was posted by Hayley Singer on her Instagram, and it reminded me a bit of Gentle and Fierce. The quote, "Material objects witness everything and say nothing. Animals say more, and they are disappearing." So in Vanessa's book, you'll find both sentient animals in the Anthropocene and non-sentient but observant animal objects that for me carry with them a certain ethnographic magic under Vanessa's eye. And I thought I'd structure this Q&A using a taxonomy of animals in Gentle and Fierce, and I've divided them up into live animals such as rabbits, flies, magpies, and of course greyhounds, and those that are objects or figurines such as the glass fish, and those that are liminal, so the somewhat uncanny animals such as the mink coat or Frank the bear. So let's start with live animals like rabbits. Way back in Vanessa's first book, I think, published book, Strawberry Hills Forever, she wrote a vignette called "Sometimes You Just Feel Like Spending 2 Days as a Rabbit," where her and a friend dressed up in rabbit costumes and hopped around the streets of Melbourne. In Gentle and Fierce, you've got a vignette about visiting Rabbit Island in Japan. Though as you're a writer based in an urban environment, how has that influenced your particular pastoral? You've written in the suburbs, the tangible presences of real animals can be easily overwhelmed by the presence of the artificial ones.
Well, that observation of how my life had been filled with animals, but they weren't all real animals, was like that observation that's the underlying Gentle and Fierce. And thinking back on like my life now, suburban, urban life, there's real animals, but there's also animals surrounding me like figurines or representations in films and books and things like that. So that was how I started off Gentle and Fierce. Like I wanted to investigate this expansive presence of animals and all the ways that they were present in my life, and also how that could link to having an environmental or ecological consciousness. Like, was it that even though I was living a life which in many ways was quite distant from the animal world, apart from, say, pets or what I would call house animals, so insects, the kind of everyday birds. But even so, I was connected to the animal world through all the animal figures and representations around me. And I like that idea as trying to activate this way of having more empathy for animals or thinking about environmental crisis and challenge. And so that's kind of the idea that underlies the book as a whole. It's kind of simmering or hovering there. I mean, I hadn't actually realised I'd written a rabbit story in my first book, Strawberry Hills Forever, until you said, Keri. So that's interesting to think about rabbits being there for me. Actually, Crawley the rabbit is his pictures there. He's passed on, but he had a grand life for a bunny. He lived to be 10. I mean, when I started writing Gentle and Fierce, or when I was in the process of writing it, and people were saying, "Oh, you're writing a new book," and I'd say, "Yes," and they'd say, "What's it about?" And I'd say, "Animals," and they'd say, "Oh, do you mean pets?" And I'd say no, because it's not really about pets, although I do, in the rabbit story, I do mention Crawley. But yeah, and then I'd go on to explain what I've just said, that it's about animal presences of all different kinds. But yeah, I do write a little bit about my pet rabbit, which, as I say in the essay in Gentle and Fierce, not considered to be a very adult pet, as I found out. But he was very inspiring to me. I think when you live with an animal, like you live close by an animal, they become so much a part of your life, like their way of being in the world. So yes, it's nice to have them there and they're your companion, but you think about how they perceive the world, and having the bunny there, like rabbits are very quiet. They don't really make much noise at all, apart from like scuffling around or thumping. And they're also very observant. So that's how they stay alive in the wild. They watch everything. I never saw him asleep in the whole 10 years. And the other thing about maybe this particular rabbit was he was very forthright. He was a very strong character. So at least the first two. I don't think I'm a very forthright person. I could probably stand to be more forthright, but I'm certainly quiet and I'm certainly observant. And I think those two qualities are kind of writerly qualities too. Like, you need to have a certain amount of quietness to be a writer, I think, even if it's just to sit with your thoughts and sit with, the computer or the page and write, and certainly being observant too. So yeah, with the Rabbit Island story, it's an experience that I had about 10 years ago now of going to Japan. It was just after the earthquake in 2011, and everything was very, very quiet there. Like, a lot of people weren't traveling. It was about 3 months after the earthquake and the Fukushima nuclear accident. And so yeah, I went to Rabbit Island. I actually thought of another anecdote, which if I'd remembered it, maybe I would have put it in The Fly in Gentle and Fierce, that happened during that trip. And that was in Tokyo. We stayed at this hotel. It was a very small hotel, the rooms were very small. It was quite a kind of cheap and humble hotel. And in the middle of the night, the alarm went off. It was blaring out. And in our minds was that there had just been this earthquake 3 months before. So I thought, oh, okay. So I got jackets on and ran downstairs. And then in the lobby, at the front desk, the night manager or the concierge was a woman who was standing there with this can of fly spray, and nobody else was around. And she looked sort of surprised to see us. And I sort of indicated that, yeah, it was the alarm, and was everything okay? And she said that she'd just been spraying a fly and it had set off the alarm. So I remembered that today. I didn't remember it in time to put it in Gentle and Fierce. But I guess, yeah, that idea of following these stories of animals throughout my life, and they can be ones like that are fairly light-hearted, or they could be more profound ones. But following them through the story of my life was one of my intentions with the book.
And did you want to read something from The Fly? I really loved that particular section of the book because it did take little vignettes from different stages of your life and different experiences.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun writing this essay. The way I wrote it was I read through my journal. So I have 20 plus years of journals where I write in detail what happens in my life, observances of different kinds. And I read through them and I looked for mentions of flies because I found for some reason I often mentioned them. And so I compiled 20 or so years of fly mentions from my journals. So it was a lot of fun to write. And I'll read a few of the vignettes. So the way it's structured is it goes from year to year, but it'll become clear as I read. The fly. The fly fidgets, bumping up against the window pane. As much as I try to ignore its buzz, the sound cuts into my attention. I turn to the window, which frames a view of an oak tree, a living photograph of pale green leaves. The fly jolts across it, seduced by the light, frustrated by the solid transparency of the glass. The sound of the fly opens up time. The buzz of its wings drills into my memory, the parts where the slightest, most incidental moments are stored. As I watch the fly hover at the glass, a moment from the past echoes. It's the late 1990s and I'm sitting on a narrow balcony, the roar of the nearby highway prickling the air around me as I read a slim blue book of Emily Dickinson's poetry. I'm drawn to the same poem every time. I heard a fly buzz when I died. Its strangeness moves me and I read it like a secret, a communication from a ghost, a reminder that life is momentary, is perpetual. Forward a few years here. The next year, at the acupuncture clinic, the practitioner flicks a pink-tipped needle into the skin under my belly button. There's a fly zigzagging over the window and I watch it to distract myself from my fear of the needle's sting. On the other side of the curtain, another acupuncturist explains to his patient that he's about to put a needle in the point for his liver, which is also the point for anger. I hear a yelp and then a man shouting, "Take it out!" The fly buzzes with renewed energy, absorbing the man's rage. Acupuncture doesn't help me much. For the next year, I'm stuck back down in the underside of life. A fly, its body the same dark iridescent green as my fingernail polish, crawls over the pub table. No one moves to shoo it away. This crowd I'm spending my time with wake up late and drink all afternoon. When I feel a pull at my scalp, I see that the man beside me is biting my hair, his teeth sunk into the end of my long plait. I reach over to reclaim it, as if taking a toy from a baby. And one more year. The next year, I'm teaching in a classroom with an odd parallelogram shape. Perhaps it is this skewed alignment that produces the weird mood which hangs over the students. One of them, who is particularly free in sharing her insecurities, says, "I don't have ideas. I just can't come up with them," staring at me like this is a challenge. Before I can respond, another student, who hasn't said a word nor taken off his sunglasses all semester, goes to the window with the rolled-up course reader and swats the fly that's been shuddering up and down the pane. "I guess," the first student continues, "I just don't know why this class even exists." I know you like that one, Keri, and it's a nice connection because well, I was your student.
Yes, I think in ficto-critical writing.
Right. Served me well, served me well.
So, yeah, if we move from live animals to animal objects, I was really taken by the glass fish, which I can see over your shoulder. And it did seem like an unusual object for you, as it seemed like I don't even know how to say this, an object d'art or something, that it wasn't from an op shop, it was from an antique store. So it is very, very beautiful and delicate and fragile, and I'm glad it didn't fall off the bookcase but when we were in the green room along with the butterflies. So how do animals as objects, and I think this is kind of key to the book, function in Gentle and Fierce? I think I read somewhere that you say they're often external repositories for memories.
Yeah, I mean, I'm someone who's very attracted to objects, and I always have been. They really fascinate me. And how they form part of our lives and our stories, and how they can seem to hold our memories, even though they don't physically hold them with our connections, but they can seem to hold memories or connections to things that are important to us, or be a tangible expression of them, so they can have this talismanic role in our lives. And I am drawn to animal objects. I have quite a lot of them, and I think, well, I know it's not just me. I mean, a lot of the kind of decorative objects are that we might acquire might have an animal connection. I mean, I know I'm a big op shopper. I also look in antique stores. I'm interested in material culture in general, and particularly places like op shops and antique stores where there's an element of chance. So I don't know what I'm going to find, and these objects they already have stories associated with them that I might be able to guess, or might be obscure to me, and then if they become part of my life, they become connected to other stories. So, I mean, to me, they're really resonant in terms of how they connect to stories and to people and places. So, so yes, I like to write the stories of objects, but I also like to kind of use them to connect out to all sorts of other kinds of stories that I might be able to thread through. So in some of the Gentle and Fierce essays, I might connect through a particular animal, like a particular object, but then a experience with that actual animal. And like in Fly Away Bird, where I write about magpies and real magpies that are there as companions, and then going to the magpie room in Sintra Castle in Portugal. And so, yeah, making those connections between the animate and the inanimate. I was quite taken with what you said about it, about inanimate things might just become animate. And that's, I mean, it could be my epitaph, perhaps. I mean, they do become animate. Inanimate things do become animate in our imagination, and certainly it's very much my experience of life is that sense of animation that one's imagination can bring to things which might seem to be kind of inert or in the service of us. Yeah, so I tried to bring that idea into Gentle and Fierce, not to conflate animal with object. I didn't want to do that, but I also wanted to acknowledge that a lot of the objects, decorative objects that surround me, do have this animal connection.
Yeah, I think they pick that up. Oh, I'm getting back to you.
No.
Okay, I'll just talk through it. I especially picked that up with say Frank the taxidermy Kodiak bear, that this idea that it threatens, to become animate in a kind of gothic sense. And so that definitely seems to sum up for me a lot of the themes in your writing about animals, but also it extended that particular vignette into writing about place and time. So Macquarie University when you were a child, and then when you returned there as a teacher. And I thought there were similar themes of family history woven into the story about the mink coat as well. So, yeah, these are the sorts of liminal animals, the mink that was alive and is now a coat. And yeah, that was a different category that wasn't an object quite, and also wasn't a live animal, but was sort of indeterminate.
Yeah, it's connected to objects. I mean, so Frank is a taxidermy Kodiak bear who lives in the biological sciences building at Macquarie Uni. And I'm no biological scientist, and neither was my grandfather, but when I was a child, he would take me there because he'd retired by then, but he was a watchmaker. He was an inventor watchmaker. And on the way back from collecting the watches, we'd visit Frank. And so the essay in Gentle and Fierce is about me going back to find Frank. But it is also about the presence of this bear. He's been there my whole life. He was there when I was a child. He was there when I was a student at Macquarie doing my PhD and teaching there for many, many years. So, and I'd often go and search for Frank. I couldn't quite remember where he was. Anyway, you can read about that in Gentle and Fierce. I mean, one thing to note, I guess that's related to objects, is that when I, as a child, I lived with my mum and my sister, and I lived with my grandparents, my mum's parents, for years, and so in their house. And I was thinking about it today, and so it was the 1980s when I was a child, but my grandparents' house was full of things from the 1950s and 1960s, and they would tell us stories about their younger life. So they were telling us these stories about the 1930s and 1940s. So really, it was like I was living in many times at once, and many past times at once, which didn't really help me much when I went to school and had to make friends and try and be a normal child, because I lived in this world that was these layers of past time. But it certainly shaped the kind of person that I am, and I think the kind of writer that I am too, and that attraction to material objects and to the kind of recent past, or things that are in living memory. And the other thing I noticed too about I'm having all these realizations now we've come to have this conversation, is that both the mink coat and the and Frank the bear, they're both like skins and fur. So Frank the Kodiak bear was a zoo bear, like he died at Taronga Zoo, and he was a surprise donation to Macquarie University. I think basically they said, we've got this bear, we'd like to give you this bear. Would you like the bear? And the biological sciences department said yes, and then they taxidermically preserved him. So and that involves like taking the skin off the bear, and there's these photographs on the wall next to Frank that describe the process. So, I mean, it's fairly macabre photos, but interesting. But yeah, this sense of like the fur coat as something that's like it's protective, but it's also soft. And I thought, oh, well, yeah, I guess that relates to that idea of Gentle and Fierce too. But I hadn't thought about it when I was writing it. And I think when you're writing a book that's a book that all these sorts of connections happen, that some are conscious and then there's lots that are not. And I did write I know a lot of essay collections are compilations of essays that are written at different times for different purposes, but I wrote the book as one complete entity. So I didn't I didn't write it piecemeal. I wrote it as one complete book, even though it's divided up into these 20 parts.
Would you like to read a section from Frank the Bear?
I will indeed. Let me find it. Frank was a Kodiak bear, taxidermically preserved in a standing posture inside a tall glass case with a wooden frame. His long curved claws were at my eye level, and as I looked up to his broad chest and full height, he seemed, from this aspect, to be immense. Yet I accepted his presence as not particularly out of the ordinary. My childhood world was populated by bears of all kinds, teddy bears and storybook bears, bears benevolent and sometimes sinister. So it didn't seem unusual that we were making these regular visits. Surely his being here at the university only meant that bears were as plentiful in adult life as they were in the lives of children. I was certain Frank was on the verge of communicating something to me. I'd watch him through the glass, waiting for any sign of movement, a twitch of his claws, a stirring of his broad, furry torso. I was young enough to be under the thrall of fairy tales, which gave every seemingly inanimate thing the potential to come to life, to be either friendly or menacing, or both at once.
Excellent. I remember a taxidermy shop in, I think, Surrey Hills when I was a kid, and I'd come to Sydney and we'd drive past it, and I wanted to go in there so badly. It was a long time ago, sort of up the top of South Dowling Street. I'll have to see if I can trawl through the Google and find it from the past.
Oh, yeah, that sounds very, very interesting to me. I mean, it was perhaps before my time. Maybe somebody who's listening to us might remember this place. I do write about a taxidermy shop in one of the essays, the one called Junk Bug. I write about Dayroll in Paris. That was quite a famous one. And visiting there.
Okay, I'll go to another theme now, which isn't particularly animal related, but as I was reading it, I was thinking about, obviously, it's focused on the relationship between humans and non-human animals, but I also thought I'd ask you just a human question about friendship. So I know that's something you've chronicled throughout your writing, and I was thinking specifically of Violet Slaughter, or Natasha, who you wrote about in Strawberry Hills Forever. And other elegiac fragments for friendship appear also in Gentle and Fierce. Natasha's mentioned again, as well as sections and vignettes written for your friend Helen, who many people here will know for her zine Fly Away Bird. So yeah, how have you approached kind of writing about friendship in your writing, I guess?
This is a very nice question to be asked on an evening when I have so many friends with me, and friends, and particularly my friendships with women have been so important to me in my life. Like, I draw so much strength from these friendships, and I am very fortunate in having close friends who are very important to me, and I mean, I think of them as part of my family. Really, they're very significant to me, and so yeah, I write about Natasha, and I write about Helen, and also my friend Steph, who all of these friends of mine I met around the same time when I started making zines, and I think it's like, so my background as a writer is in zine making, and I still make zines. Like I just made a new one in the last month that I'm yet to send to you, Keri, but it's in the post. But these friendships occurred through zines, and in a lot of ways, I think the way I write is kind of like writing to a friend, and I think that comes from zine making. Like, because when you write a zine, you're writing to a small and sympathetic group of people who are like, they are, many of them probably are your friends, or you think of them like, they could potentially be, and I think that brings about a particular kind of voice, or a particular kind of, it's not that I assume a familiarity, but there's a kind of a warmth or an inclusiveness to writing to someone who's a friend, or imagining a friend at the kind of the other end of the missive. So the other thing with zine writing is I always think about it connected to writing letters, and a lot of these friendships started off as letter writing friendships, particularly in the 90s, like sort of pre-internet days, where a lot of this was happening via the post. So yeah, I write about Natasha and Helen, both of who've passed away, and I was thinking, why did I focus on these friendships in particular in this book? And I think it's because in writing about animals, I'm writing about relationships that are kind of distanced or dispersed in some way. A lot of the animal, like I said at the start, like my interactions with animals are often like they're mediated or they're distant in some way. And the relationship you have with someone who you love, who is no longer here, is also a dispersed or a distant kind of relationship. Like, I feel both of them, Helen and Natasha, with me all the time, and every day of my life. But our relationship is different now that they're not physically there. And I think that's I was wondering what the connection was, and I think that's it. And it's not to say it's the same as that relationship I have with animals, but it's sort of similar. And they also both had quite distinct relationships to animals. So Natasha, as I know you know, Keri, she grew up on a sheep farm in the Riverina, and also when we were friends, we were both goths, so thick eyeliner, many layers of lacy black clothes, dyed black hair. And so I remember visiting her at her farm, and we had this plan that we'd take collect some of the sheep skulls from the paddocks and have a stall at glebe markets where we'd sell them for people to have. So this is the 1990s, maybe that wouldn't fly now, but then it seemed like quite a viable idea. So so she had a very particular relationship to animals that you have when you grow up on a farm. And also Helen had a particular relationship to animals too. She was a great friend to animals, particular birds, and her funny little fierce dog Snuffy. And her, as an artist, a lot of her artwork was her drawings would be of these animals, so birds. And the name of her zine, Fly Away Bird, is where I took the name of that essay from. And I know her wife Lola's here tonight, so hello.
Yeah, I guess I found that really interesting too when you mentioned that Natasha had wanted to kind of had sort of told you to keep diaries, and that they were, worthy of writers' tools, and that she wanted to grow up to be a writer one day. And now, that sense of time has passed and you have kind of fulfilled that in some way. It's kind of an iterative story that's woven throughout a lot of the work of yours that I've read, of these mentions of friendships and partners. And it really, people as well, really, kind of are a really nice iterative connection with all of your writing, and friendship's one of those themes that jumps out at me.
Yeah, I've learned a lot from my friends, like with Natasha. She didn't tell me to keep journals. I think I just saw her doing it. I thought, and she really strongly wanted to be a writer. Whereas at the time when we were friends, we weren't friends for a very long time before she died. She died young, at 20, of leukemia, and so we really knew each other for less than 2 years, but it was such an intense and formative time and friendship that it's just meant a lot to me in my life. But I saw her keeping journals, and I knew she wanted to be a writer. And I can be a bit slow sometimes, I think, and that's a good idea. She was very wise, but she was wise beyond her years, and I learned a lot from her. But for all my friends, I learn things from continually now, still too. And that's one of the wonderful things about friendship, is that your friendship becomes something kind of additional to, more than the sum of its parts, and parts of you start to grow in ways that they wouldn't otherwise.
Absolutely. Another theme I picked up in Gentle and Fierce involves travel to particular cultural sites, and I often thought that you set yourself quite a challenge. So how do you write about visiting Sylvia Plath's grave, for instance, or retracing Walter Benjamin's footsteps at the Berlin Zoo? So I wondered if you wanted to talk about some of those vignettes.
Yeah,
I think I travel at the moment.
Well, it has been frustrating to have a book come out in lockdown. Although one of the really nice things about it is I know that the book can be a companion to people while we can't really do what we want to day, and also can't think about travel in that kind of active way we might have in the past, at least for now. So I'm glad the book's been able to take people on a few journeys. I always seek out literary sites when I travel somewhere, just out of interest. I'm interested in how writers' life and work fit together. Going to Sylvia Plath's grave, Sylvia Plath was a very influential writer to me, particularly when I was a teenager, as I know she is for a lot of people. And coincidentally, my grandfather, who I mentioned before, the watchmaking one, he grew up in the town of Hebden Bridge in Yorkshire, which is next to Heptonstall, which is where Sylvia Plath is buried. Now, those two pieces of information don't really have too much to do with each other, except for the fact that when I was there, they kind of came together. And yeah, so my literary pilgrimage was to go to visit Sylvia Plath's grave, but I knew that I was not the only one. And I mean, I would have known that anyway, but I knew because there were lots of notes left on the grave and people had left all sorts of things for her there. And the notes really fascinated me in particular because, I mean, I had a look at some of them as you probably would if you were there. They're sort of written to Sylvia, or they would be pieces of writing that people had left. But I noticed they were all eaten by snails, and that's where the animal connection comes in. So some of you might be listening to this thinking, hang on, what's the connection to animals with this story? So so seeing these snail-eaten letters animated my imagination for this essay, and I wrote about my visit there. Like I wrote it in the first half of it, at least in third person, even though it's my experience. And I think I wasn't just trying to be tricky with that. I was trying to show that, like, it's me going there today and writing my note and leaving it there, but tomorrow it's going to be somebody else leaving their note, and then the day after that. I mean, people who live nearby must just see a stream of Sylvia Plath acolytes coming by. Like when I was there, there was someone else walking their dog, like obviously a local, walking their dog through the other side of the cemetery, and I thought about how for them it's a very different kind of place, and everyone else buried there is the locals from the village. It's a tiny village up on a hill in Yorkshire. It's not, but it just happens to have Sylvia Plath's. It'd be Sylvia Plath's final resting place because it's where Ted Hughes is from. So that's how come she ended up being buried there.
Would you like to read from the Sylvia Plath essay?
Yeah, I think we'll check in with the snails. I'll just find the okay. The first note she, i.e. me, picks up from the tangle of objects left on the grave is written on pink paper with a jagged edge where it has been ripped out of a spiral notebook. In the top margin are words written in careful script, as if someone unused to writing by hand. Sylvia, know that your words live on, even though you are gone. Interrupting even though is a string of irregular squarish holes with curled edges, the work of snails. All of the notes are patterned this way, she notices, reaching for a crumpled ball of paper among the stems of borage. The snails have turned it almost to lace. She stretches it out carefully, reading rocks and weeping and slept and rising between the curls of snail-eaten paper. As the other visitors have done, she leaves her own note to Sylvia. She rips a page from her journal and holds her pen over the lines, considering how to transcribe her thoughts that tremble at the point of becoming words. Eventually she writes, somewhere in the back of my eye is a tiny version of you, bright as a pinhead, helping me to see. That night, after the sun sets and the dew has settled on the grass, the snails emerge. They slide out from the crevasses where they have sheltered from the daylight, inside cracks in rocks or clamped onto the cool undersides of leaves close to the soil. The snails move smoothly, slowly, leaving silver behind them as they edge towards the folded page. The paper is soft and fresh, wilting in the damp of night. The first snail to reach it nibbles at the words, its microscopic teeth rasping at the paper, leaving a ragged edge.
Excellent, thank you. I remember it was you who must have written about finding people's shopping lists in supermarkets too, and that made me, I've noticed them ever since at Mayfield Woolworths, and I haven't collected them, but I snoop on them all the time and just love the random assortment of banal things that people need to buy. So that was...
Yeah, I always noticed them too. I mean, yeah. So I think I made a zine based on them in like 1999 or 2000 or something, but yeah, I'm going to notice them for life. Maybe there's less of them now that people don't use pen and paper so much, but I still see them. Them around the place.
Definitely know that feeling of a piece of paper ripped out of a spiral notebook with the ragged edge. So yeah, that's what it was reminding me of.
I love notes and I love scraps. So, and I could, as I was reading that, I was thinking, well, I was really trying to feel my snailness, I think, in that sort of desire for the paper. And I remember when I was writing it, looking up snail teeth, one of those Google searches where you feel a bit self-conscious, where you type it in and you think, oh, that's just an odd thing to be looking up.
And they have them?
Yeah, they have microscopic teeth. I was trying to be as factually accurate as possible. I'd never thought about it, but then I was thinking, why do they make those particular shapes? Like, it's a very distinctive pattern that you can always tell when it's a snail that's eaten your mail, or a piece of paper that's been somewhere in their path.
Okay, and finally, because I want to leave some time for questions, I was wondering if you'd say something about the duality of the title gentle and fierce. So I think it's also summed up in the shadow puppetry of the cover drawing, like what's behind. The scary, shadowy bear is somebody's, very crafted, beautiful hand. And it also, every time I think about bears, I can't help but think of Werner Herzog's film Grizzly Man when I think of humans and bears. And I thought that really captured both the gentle and fierce sides of human folly when it comes to animals. And then I was thinking, wow, that was in the days pre-Tiger King. Like, it's been amped up even further since then. But what are you trying to convey with these words? I loved how in his review of Gentle and Fierce in the Saturday paper, Andy Jackson writes, the book might prompt us as readers to revive a certain gentleness.
Yeah, that was such a nice interpretation of the book. I mean, it's certainly more gentle than fierce, the book, if you're kind of portioning it out, but I didn't really think about it that way, and I didn't mean them to be in opposition, really. I meant to think of them together. It didn't start off its life being called Gentle and Fierce. That kind of emerged in the first year of me writing it. It took about 2 years to write. And these are words that are often used to describe animals and also humans. Well, humans are animals. But yeah, they're often used. And it's one of those things where maybe like noticing the shopping lists, I'm going to be noticing the words gentle and fierce forevermore, and particularly gentle. Noting that they're often used to describe animals, I'd also paired that with this observation that women's writing that is forthright or uncompromising or strong is often called fierce. It's just something I'd noticed. And I thought about it and what it meant, and it is to do with strength. So, I mean, there's many ways we can unpack that, but I'm not going to. But thinking about strength and knowing my kind of writing is a gentler kind of writing, but thinking, well, what kind of strength comes from gentleness? Because there is a strength that comes from it. That's different to the kind of fierce strength. And maybe even it's in terms of time, like something that's gentle is often kind of slower or more sustained, and something that's fierce is like this kind of flare of energy. And we need them both in different times, and they do different things. But I think of them like life forces, and they've animated my life, or they could be thought of more generally as kind of animating life in general, like animal life, or the life of an individual person like myself. So once I put the words together, they kind of sparked against each other. But yes, as Andy pointed out in his review, it is very much turned towards gentleness out of the two of them. And I think the types of things that I do as a writer, so I'm attracted to the kind of the small or the momentary, or the kind of hidden in plain sight, and things that perhaps aren't so readily noticed but are just there with us. And I'm an acutely attentive person. I always notice these things, and because this is what makes up our lives, these small things. But that's a gentler way of thinking about writing about life, perhaps. So, like, rather than the kind of flares of energy, like thinking about the kind of slower and more sustained ways that our lives take place. So, once I kind of extracted those words, it all started to come together around those ideas, and some essays touch on it a bit more directly than others. But yeah, I found it. Yeah, it's like I kind of found the right way to frame the book once I determined that as being maybe a potential title. I looked back at the page where I'd written it. It's kind of like a eureka moment where I was just kind of noodling around on the page, and then I suddenly start writing about gentle and fierce, and yeah, light bulbs were going on.
I remember you explained the title in the final essay, don't you? And now I've slipped my mind, but I mean, it had deep resonances as well for me. Was it a crocodile or something?
Oh yeah. So it was at Cementa, the contemporary art festival at Candos. That which I don't think I actually say in the essay, but I say in the notes. And the artist Tom Roberts draws portraits, or was for this artwork drawing portraits based on the crown of people's heads. So would trace the crown of someone's head and then make an animal out of it. And for mine, it was really big. I was thinking, oh, what's it going to be? And we were all kind of gathered round watching him draw it, and it was a crocodile with these baby crocodiles. And yeah, it was interesting, especially for someone who doesn't have children too. And I'm thinking, what's it representing? Like, what are these baby crocodiles representing? And but I mean, I guess that just shows, like, we're often like thinking about us as humans and how we think about our way of being in the world, and how we think about animals' ways of being in the world, and how that might be different or other, or how that might be similar, is something that's ongoing, I think.
Yeah. Okay. I was going to ask you to do one more reading maybe before you and I finish our Q&A. And while you're reading, Nick's asked if anyone has any questions. Lots of people have had comments, but if anyone, wants to ask a question, just put it in the chat, and we'll have 10 minutes or so to have a conversation with Vanessa, with the audience.
Well, the last piece that I'll read is just a few paragraphs from The Ceramic Zoo, which is about, an otter figurine, but also figurines in general. And it starts off in my childhood. A lot of the essays skip through time, so they'll move between the different periods of my life. So yeah, they might move from childhood to adolescence to the present, or back again, or in other combinations. So this is me as a child. My greatest wish was to move carefully through the world, to pose no threat to anything around me. I felt uncomfortably giant as I walked through the fields that led down into the valley behind the house. Grasshoppers sprung away, disappearing into the meadow to either side as I disturbed them from their positions. My feet flattened the grass, carving paths through it in curving, haphazard lines, like the scribbles on the trunks of the gum trees that marked the edge of the paddock. The scribbles were written by caterpillars as they chewed through the inner bark, and I sometimes imagined that I had the ability to read these markings as if they were words. In the evenings in summer, the crickets made a different music to the kind suggested by the insect figurines in the cabinet in my room. A blanket of pulsing, churring sound stretched out around the house, arising from the long grass. If I moved towards the edge of the sound, the section closest to me would stop, like turning off a light, and I wished there was a way I could float out into the field undetected.
Beautiful. So we have got a question in the chat. I'm sure you can read it too and don't need me to say it, but it's got a great little pun in it, which is thinking about this book as a collection of essays. What do you see its lineage, and who are its forebears?
Its forebears. Well, very good, Annie. Very good. So yeah, in terms of essayistic forebears, I think I wrote about this on my my Instagram series. Like, I had John Burgess while I look at animals on my desk the whole time I was writing Gentle and Fierce down there at the bottom of the stack. So I would definitely that essay was important, and I would go back to it and read it now and then when I felt like I'd sort of lost my way, or wanted to recalibrate how I was thinking about animals and refocus. So that was a very important essay for me in writing the book specifically. well, Keri mentioned Rebecca Solnit before, and I found her essays very influential. I read a lot of her work when I was writing Mirror Sydney, actually, for the place focus. But I think there's something about that kind of attentiveness to the natural world, and also attentiveness to thought. I mean, essays do, you know, that they generally do that kind of dual thing of, you know, looking out, looking in, close attention to the world, close attention to thought.
Excellent. And Lisa's asked, what place does memory have in a busy world?
Yeah, I like that question. It can it can be all sorts of things. I mean, memory appears in all sorts of different ways, and we experience it differently. So there's the kind of involuntary memories that kind of pop up, and, you know, memory can be it can be something that's kind of comforting. It can also be something that's traumatic. But so yeah, I mean, it's very broad. But in terms of what place it can have in a busy world, I mean, often it's a chance, can be a chance to go elsewhere or to be reflective. And I think in a busy world, opportunities to reflect are less often encountered, and they more have to be made. So, I mean, one of the things that that I hope to do in this book, but also in my writing in general, is to use my memories as ways to get my readers to think about their own memories. I know that happens because people write to me and say that that kind of, that they'll think about, say, like Frank the bear might make them think about some taxidermy animal that was significant to them, or things like that. And that's always really satisfying to me as a writer. So to help kind of make that space for memories to come back up, and to make those kind of reflective moments.
Yeah, that definitely happens to me. When I read your work, I think I told you about Isla's sheep, Best Bear, and it's a really beautiful way to have a dialogue, I guess, with an author. Maybe comes out of your early zine writing, where there was literally a lot of dialogue going on. I still feel that you've carried that over into the writing that you're doing now. Okay, there's a few more questions. So Joy has asked if there were any animals that you consciously or inexplicitly avoided. Were they your vermin? Or do you have any?
No, I don't think there was really. I mean, I felt pretty open. I mean, I did write a list of them all, and I kind of looked at, I assessed what kind of, or where they would fit. Like, am I writing just about mammals, say? You know, when I wrote about the glass fish, I was like, no, it's the only fish or animal that lives in the water. Well, maybe the otter does as well. Not really. I mean, there were essays that I wrote, that I started writing, that didn't make it into the book, but it wasn't because I wanted to avoid them as animals. It was just because they didn't work for some reason. Yeah, and they never quite came together. But no, I was fairly open to all beings.
And Anwin's asked a question about metamorphosis. Could you say a little bit more about the theme of metamorphosis running through the collection? So Vanessa the butterfly, Frank the bear, the statue, the mink coat that was once living animals, and the junk bug.
Thanks, Anwin, a very important person in the writing of this book. Yeah, I love that question. It's I think it's something to do with imagination, and which I mentioned before as something that's important to me as a writer and as a person. That idea that through imagination, and it was I feel like the childhood me is kind of still quite squarely within who I am today, and, you know, for better or worse. Or I've more feel like a kind of a babushka doll, where like all the versions of me are all kind of stacked up inside, and they're all kind of there, and they all still kind of have their say in my day-to-day life as an adult. But yeah, going back to that idea of metamorphosis and imagination, I think, like, as a child, that idea that imagination could transform anything, even if something was mundane or difficult, as it sometimes was, as it, you know, sometimes is for all of us at different times, that it could be imaginatively transformed, something that I kind of clung onto as a bit of a lifeline. And I think I still do. And yeah, when I was younger, I had chronic fatigue syndrome for a long time. I really couldn't do very much. And actually being in lockdown, makes me think of that a bit too, because I, like everybody else, was doing things, but I couldn't really do very much. But yeah, I found that work of imagination, and that sense of that I could even if I couldn't really do very much physically, I could kind of transform my thoughts in any way that I wanted, and it still seems like a kind of a magic to me. And I think because this book is so much of about me and my way of being in the world. So I think of it as a memoir. I mean, maybe I wouldn't call it a memoir, but I think it's definitely based in memoir, and that's one of the reasons why it's a big part of it.
Great. Yes, and Beth said that you always help me remember my memories. Eternally grateful for your work. And I agree as well. I think to mention Rebecca Solnit again and her book Infinite Cities, I always think that your algorithm is infinite, and that's what I love about it. It's just like detritus and detail, and it just seems to kind of be infinite and tickle me in that same spot every time. So I really, enjoy reading your work and have for a very long time. I used to say to my classes at uni, oh, you should get these zines and leave them by the toilet. And it sounds like I wasn't giving them a good review, but actually I meant like you'll just be on the toilet for hours reading Laughter and the Sound of Teacups. And maybe that was one of those in a busy world where I did have these moments of quiet, but, leave them by your bed or just, I really do, look forward to what you write next. And that might be my question. Have you got anything on the boil?
I've always got things on the boil. I mean, there is a point, I think I've found, and this is my fourth book now, so I now know that like the period directly after finishing a book or having a book just come out, it can be hard to think of what on earth I could manage to say. But yeah, I do have a few things on the boil. I made a new zine, and that is something which always sparks off kind of a new direction. So nothing I can really articulate so strongly right now. But yeah, I'm always working on something. And
you will keep your fans. I'm sure there's many in the audience. There'll be more for us to read soon, and look out for your latest zine. Yeah. We've just had a comment. Someone's been online from Montreal, so fantastic.
Oh, well, I mean, one of the good things about doing events online rather than in person is that people can join from all over the world. And Amber's a zine friend, quite a few zine friends here tonight.
Excellent. Okay, well, we might wrap it up there, and thank you very much for the conversation. And Nick has, materialised and is back on screen. So
thank you so much, Keri. You're one of those friends I mentioned before.
Fab.
You're a very supportive person to me, and a guiding light. So thank you very much.
Thank you. It's enjoyable.
I just wanted to say through all this as well, I've been watching the poster of Lou Reed behind you, Keri, which says the return of the rock and roll animals. So I don't know if that's set dressing, but the human animal connections have been in the room on both sides of the screen. Thank you, Keri, so much for hosting this session. And thank you, of course, Vanessa, for the book and for your beautiful speaking and reading. I just wanted to let everybody know that the session's being recorded, so you can, if you want to send it to somebody or revisit it, it'll be available through Crowdcast, and we'll put it on the webpage for the book and on our YouTube channel as well. Of course, you can buy the book. There's a button at the bottom of the screen that you can buy it from. Many of you here, perhaps most of you, will already have a copy, but as I was reminded by a book retailer recently, Father's Day is coming out, and I'm almost certain your dad doesn't have a copy of the book, so that's an opportune moment. And you can buy it from our website and from any good bookshops. We also have another event next week that I thought I would mention with Zara Butcher-McGonigal talking to Holland Singleton about her book, Nostalgia Has Ruined My Life, about Zara's book. So if you enjoyed this session, please do come along to that one as well. But thank you all so much for coming. It's been great to have so many of you here. And it's been, as I'm saying this, my cat is threatening to get up on the table. So it seems like a very good time to, oh, here she comes. It seems like a very good time to wind things up, but and that is the head of the cat coming into shot. thank you all very much.
As she should be. As she should. She should be there to end the proceeding.
The end is nigh. So thank you all for coming, and thank you both for this session, and see you all again soon. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you, everyone. It was very special to be able to celebrate the release of Gentle and Fierce with you all. Thank you.
And yeah, thank you.